Right. First of all, everyone gets a sticker this morning because everyone sat forward. There aren't any empty pews in the front, so that means you guys all have this is probably one of the first times in over 20 years of church ministry I've actually seen this where the front row is actually sat in, which is incredible. No more apathetic Anglicans, back row Baptists, lethargic Lutherans. None of that. We're hungry Christians. I love it. That's fantastic. All right, so that's thing number one. Thing number two is we are sort of transitioning from our last series, How We Ascend, to this new series, Deep Waters. And I realized, I might be over-egging this whole descent, ascent thing a little bit. It wasn't intentional. But we've gone through this series about how we ascend and looking at this sort of common pattern of descent and ascent throughout the scriptures. And also looking at our own lives, and we've got bottoms and we've got tops. We've got things when we're low and times when we're high. And actually, when we're in a low spot, when we're feeling a bit alienated from God, when we're feeling a little bit despondent, when things are a bit chaotic, we feel a bit overwhelmed, how do we ascend? And we looked at how we move from that place of metaphoric exile, because the Psalms of Ascent, right, are 15 Psalms within the book of Psalms that Jewish people would have sung as a part of their normal hymnody, their worship choruses, and they would have sung them as they perhaps were returning from exile into the land or journeying from somewhere in the land or in the world to Jerusalem, specifically to the temple to worship. And just like Ezekiel's vision of this restored temple had 15 steps, there are 15 Psalms of Ascent. So this idea of how do we go from our place of despair and despondency or lowness into the place of God's promise, into the place of God's presence. And last week, Justin did a great job talking to us about this sort of, one of the last sort of Psalms here, the Psalms of Ascent, is really worship. We move from our place of sort of despair or lowness or exile, feeling alienated from God, to the place of God's promise and into his presence together, and we do it worshipfully with our eyes fixed on him and calling out to him. Now, I want to actually, before we jump into this series about the God of deep waters, I want to return actually to a Psalm of Ascent that we sort of skipped over. It's Psalm 124, and from it, I want to identify just a few different things. Some of them are a little bit related. Some of them feel a little bit like I'm just throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks. But there's just some things I think I'd like to draw our attention to. If we could. So let's read Psalm 124. I'd also encourage you, if you have your own hard copy of the Bible, bring it. You're never going to get more familiar with the Bible by not using it or not handling it. It will always remain foreign. If you don't know how to use your smartphone and you only pick it up to use it for the things that you know how to use, and then when you if you have problems, you ask your grandkids or your kids or somebody else. You're never going to get more familiar with the Bible if you don't pick it up and use it. So Psalm 124, probably about the middle. If you can't find it, then use the table of contents. There's no shame in that game. All right, so Psalm 124, a song of ascent of David. David wrote, "If the Lord had not been on our side," let Israel say, "if the Lord had not been on our side when people attacked us, they would have swallowed us alive. When their anger flared against us, the flood would have engulfed us. The torrent would have swept over us. The raging waters would have swept us away. Praise be to the Lord, who has not let us be torn by their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the fowler's snare. The snare has been broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth." Now, we remember really quickly, the broad sort of movement of Israel's history, of actually humanity's history. God created, it was good. Human beings disobeyed, it went badly. All right? And in that badness, God said, I'm going to redeem, restore, recreate all this stuff. I've got a plan. Abraham, I'm making a promise with you that through your offspring, my plan of recreation, redemption, restoration is going to be worked out. And then Abraham had sons. He had Jacob, and then he had, I just messed it up. Isaac, and then he had Jacob. Sorry. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then Jacob wrestled with God. And when he wrestled with God, his name was changed to Israel, which means wrestles with God and men. And Israel wrestled with God, and Israel had 12 sons. We call the 12 tribes of Israel, and that's where that nation state gets its name, from the man who wrestled with God, struggled with God. And you might feel, I fit in there. I wrestle with God. I struggle with God. Hey, you're in good company. That's how it's always been. All right, so anyway, the people of Israel ended up in slavery in Egypt. Long story short, God delivered them from slavery miraculously, brought them to Mount Sinai, and made a promise. Sometimes we call that a covenant, right? And made a covenant with them, said, I'm going to be your God. You're going to be my people. I'm giving you a law. And if you live according to this law, as you go into the land I promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that you would live in, if you obey it, it will go well for you, right? Everything will be cool. You'll have lots of kids, you'll have lots of crops, and when foreign armies attack you, they will run away naked and ashamed, sort of. I mean, God doesn't say that specifically, but yeah. But if and when you don't obey this law, actually, you're not going to have lots of kids, you're not going to have lots of crops, and foreign armies are going to come. They're going to conquer you and exile you from the land and scatter you throughout the earth. But in faithfulness to Abraham, I'm going to bring you back and make a new covenant with you. And that's what we see play out in the national history of Israel. They go into the land, and there's a kingdom, and it's great. And then they're disobedient, and then the Babylonians and the Assyrians come and conquer in different ways and scatter them. You might remember that from our talk in Esther a while back. So anyway, the psalmist is remembering this right now. Remembering being conquered by the Babylonians and the Assyrians. And he's saying, man, if God hadn't been on our side, then we would have been swallowed up alive. And you might hold up for just a second and say, wait, hold on. If God hadn't been on our side, we would have been, didn't you kind of get swallowed up? You know, the Assyrians and Babylonians came and they pretty much like wiped you out. Like, you know, you were carried away as captives into foreign lands. They took your Hebrew names and gave you Babylonian names, named you after their gods. And they like had plans to like wipe you out totally, you know, under the Persians. We talked about in Esther. So how can you talk about God's deliverance if the Lord hadn't been on our side? Surely if the Lord was on our side, those foreign armies never would have come in the first place, right? And there's something I want to talk about before we get into this whole the God of deep waters sort of thing. I want to just take that moment to think about this sort of triumphalism that sometimes we have, or we resist. If I'm being really bluntly honest, I tend to resist anything that kind of whiffs of sort of a triumphalism. You know, God's on our side, and so everything's going to be okay. Well, hold up. God's been on a lot of people's side, and it went pretty pear-shaped. You know? So, hold on. And I tend to kind of, as a person, be a bit resistant of that. And that probably has to do with my own junk and my own stuff. And not wanting to be disappointed by God. Hoping in something that never comes to fruition and be like, God, why didn't you? It's like, well, actually, you know what's safe is just don't have an expectation. All right, so sometimes, I'll just be honest, sometimes that's easy for me to do in my life in Christ. Just have a low expectation, and everything will be cool. You won't get let down. You won't get frustrated. And you won't have to grapple with those questions. Gee whiz, God, where were you on that one? Right? I'm just being honest. Others of us have this like really radically high expectation of God and expect God to do things he actually hasn't promised you he'd do. You know? And you're constantly like, God's going to do it. Yeah, I'm just going to believe. And then you're kind of always, you ride this roller coaster of, yeah, he's going to do it. Oh, he did. Yeah, he's going to do it. It's like, dude, you need an anchor here, pal. Right? This is unhealthy. It's just as unhealthy as Peter's proclivity to just have a low expectation. So somewhere there's a happy medium in there that we all need to find. And we could maybe try to find that together. But anyhow, that's just one sort of one sort of side point that I want to make is here when the psalmist is talking about we weren't overcome, by these horrible things. We weren't swallowed alive. We weren't engulfed. The torrent didn't sweep over us. The raging waters didn't sweep us away. It's like, well, actually, it kind of looked like it did for a bit. But there's a long view here. There's a long view here. And God's faithfulness often is exhibited in the long view rather than the short-term view that our brains are trained to expect in our particular cultural time frame. It's got to be now. All right. I sort of jumped ahead a little bit, so I apologize for that. This whole thing, though, if the Lord had been on our, if the Lord had not been on our side, then these bad things would have happened. I also get kind of twitchy about this. I'm just being vulnerable with you. The whole God's on our side thing. I get a little bit twitchy because everyone thinks God's on their side. Everyone thinks justice is on their side. No one's going around and be like, I'm unjust and immoral. I mean, there's some. But you can take all kinds of different socio-political debates, all kinds of moral and ethical debates about how to live as a person or how to live specifically even as a Christian, and people think they've got God on their side. And actually, it's not about having God on my side, it's about being on God's side. And I'll usually refer back to Joshua. And Joshua's getting ready to attack Jericho. If you don't know the story, it's in the book of Joshua. And before they're going to attack, Joshua encounters this angel of the Lord and says, whose side are you on, ours or our enemies? And the angel of the Lord says, neither. I'm the commander of the armies of the Lord. In other words, it's not about me being on your side, it's about you being on my side. I tend to lean that way, right? But here I need to let the Word of God sort of correct my understanding and keep me from leaning to what's comfortable for me. And say, actually, no, God is on his people's side. He is on our side. And he's not on our side because we're good. He's not on our side because we're clever. He's not on our side because we're right. He's on our side because he's chosen us. He loves us. And of course, being on our side might mean that we experience discipline. So I want to talk about this for just a moment. This whole thing of God being on our side. If we read the Hebrew prophet Habakkuk. Habakkuk has a real dilemma. And you can read it some of the time if you'd like to. It's one of the little prophets. Short. You could read it in 5 minutes. But anyhow, maybe 10. Depending on, I'm a slow reader, so I'd be more like 10 or 15. But anyway, Habakkuk understands that the Babylonians are going to come and conquer Israel. Actually, no, the southern kingdom of Judah, rather. And he's like, what the heck, God? The Babylonians are filthy pagans. They're unjust. They're unrighteous. They're horrible. And they're going to be the ones to execute your discipline on your people? I am vexed. And God kind of says, I know who the Babylonians are. And I'll deal with them in my time and in my way. For a while, God was on the Babylonians' side, as it were. So 2 things. Just because God's on your side doesn't mean God is cool with you. Because he might just be accomplishing his purposes. Thing number 2, if God is cool with you, God is on your side, even when it looks like poop's hitting the fan. Because God disciplines those he loves, and he rebukes those he treats as one of his children. Right? So just a couple side journeys we've been on here. First of all, just because God's on your side doesn't mean he's cool with you. But if God's cool with you, he is on your side. him being on your side doesn't look like bad stuff never happens. What it looks like is he brings you through it. And I'll add this. He might not bring you individually through it the way you'd like, but he is going to bring his people through it. Because there are certainly Israelites, Jewish people, who died in exile and never got back to the promised land. All right? Also, there are Jewish people born in exile. They never did anything wrong. They were born in exile and then were brought to land. So let's hold that all with a little bit of nuance as we seek to apply it to our lives. Because it'd be really, really easy for me to just rah-rah all y'all. You know, everyone who's all y'all. I never say that. What in the world? Feel free to mock me prolifically after that. Was that all y'all? What state are you from? Anyhow, I just totally lost track of everything I was going to say. I threw myself off with all y'all. All right, whatever I was going to say was probably unnecessary then, so we're just going to leave it. God was like, don't say that, Peter. That's ridiculous. You need to move on. All right. So anyway, oh yeah, I was talking about if you were born in exile or not. Yeah, we'll just leave that. Oh yeah, I could be like, rah, rah, God, everybody, God's on your side and everything's gonna be cool. Don't you feel good? We're gonna sing songs that make you feel good. I'm gonna give you a sermon that makes you feel good. Then we're gonna have communion. You're gonna feel real special after that. And then we're gonna have, tea, biscuits, and a barbecue, and we'll all just leave feeling great. God's on our side, life's cheerio. Yeah, and you'll feel real great for a bit of a Sunday. And then reality will smack you across the face. And you're like, Peter's actually a jerk. But I'll just come back next Sunday for the pick-me-up. Get my little jab of spiritual adrenaline and get my fix once a week. And if once a week isn't enough, I'll find that right playlist on Spotify that makes me feel special too. And we need something more substantial than that, don't we? We need reality. And the reality is, when God's on your side, it doesn't necessarily mean he's cool with you. If God's cool with you, through repentance and faith in Jesus, he is on your side. That doesn't mean poop's not going to hit the fan. And it doesn't mean that necessarily in this life you're going to get to see the other side of it. Also, it might mean, I can hear you, Ella. Ella, shh, I can hear you. It's like this. Also, right? Also, you might be born in the poop storm. That doesn't mean that is the definitive reality for all time. Right? Don't let that be the case. God has all kinds of crazy things going on that we can't fathom. All right. Now I want to talk a little bit about this whole being swallowed. Oh, there's a lot about Jonah being swallowed alive and then being vomited back up. But anyway, we're not going to go there. The flood would have engulfed us. The torrent would have swept over us. The raging waters would have swept us away. Have you been in that kind of a situation? Have you, literally. Like, have you ever been at the sea, like in the ocean, and you got caught in a wave and you got in the tumble? And you're like, I don't know which way is up, and salt water hurts. And you don't know which way is up. Or have you ever, like when you're a kid at the pool with your friends, we used to do this thing called the cycle? Genuinely. And in the cycle, what we do is you get someone in a full Nelson, right? Do you know what a full Nelson is? It's when you're behind them and you go under their armpits and around the back of their neck, right? And you've got them. There's nothing they can do. And then you just cycle in the water, out of the water. It's basically amateur waterboarding for children. It's great. Americans come up with all these. I'm not joking. That was okay. But anyhow. And you're like, and it's fun for a while, and then you gotta kind of tap out, and then you're inhaling all this chlorinated water. It feels terrible, and then you're like, let's do it again, because you're a kid and you're kind of crazy, all right? And maybe that's just me and my friends. Okay? But have you ever had that moment where you thought, actually, I'm kind of drowning here, like literally? This is a bit too much. I can't catch my breath. That's what it feels like sometimes when you're in the midst of it. The water is deep, the water is raging, and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to necessarily get out of this. And I was going to, it's there, it's in that moment, right, where it's important to remember, no, God's on my side. Now, I'm going to tell a story that's going to seem irrelevant and sort of tertiary, but just bear with me. So, I don't know, it must have been 15 years, 16 years ago, something like that. The church I was at the time, we did this men's trip out to West Virginia. We lived in Indiana at the time, and we did this men's trip out to West Virginia for some whitewater rafting. So in a certain period of time, there's a season where there's the Gauley River, not Gauley like golly, G-A-U-L, it doesn't matter. But the Gauley River has a riverbed, has a dam. They dam it up. And then once a year, for a certain period of time, they open the dam up, right, just to relieve the pressure. And it becomes, the upper and lower Gauley River become like the number 2 whitewater rafting, sort of river in North America and like number 5 in the world. Like it's massive. And the upper Gauley River has like this incredible concentration of class 4 and 5 rapids. And so we're going to raft the upper Gauley River. And it's fantastic. We're going to do this. Now, we're going through, and it's great fun, and there's this one rapid called Pillow Rock. And Pillow Rock, when you're sitting there and you've got a river guide, someone who knows the river, and then you've got you and your mates or whoever are in the raft, and the guide is sitting in the back and telling you, how to, which kind of strokes and, forward, backward, choreographing, right, are rowing, and also navigating the river. And as we're approaching Pillow Rock, he's saying, like, listen, this is going to be counterintuitive because most rocks we try to avoid, but this rock, we're going to go straight on, right? And we're going to go straight on for it. We're going to have to paddle hard, all right? So he's preparing us. And when we get there, when we hit the rock, see if you can touch the top of the rock with your paddle. And so we're approaching Pillow Rock, and we're paddling hard, like, oh man, this is really counterintuitive to be paddling straight for this rock. And I was kind of sat in the front left of the raft. And so when it came time to like try and touch the oar to the top of the rock, I thought, I'm not going to be arrogant, right? I'm not going to be showboaty. I'm not going to, I'm going to be humble as it pertains my relationship to these rapids, right? This isn't the time to play. This is the time to take it seriously because I've seen some guys fall in that doesn't look fun, all right? So sure enough, we hit the rock, and I play it nice and cool, and I don't try to hit the top of the rock. And so our raft flipped over. Because reaching up and trying to touch the top of the rock kept the weight up on the raft in a certain way so that we wouldn't topple. And in my false humility, I disobeyed the instruction because I thought it was going to be arrogant and cocky and ended up toppling the raft because of it. And then we all spilled into the water, and it was fine. None of us drowned, all right? But and for some of us, that was a more like traumatic experience than others. But I want to just touch on this for just a moment. When you're in like the stew of it, right? When you're in the turmoil of it, whatever it happens to be, there are times when the raft guy, God, metaphorically here, says, I want you to do this. You're like, well, that's a bit arrogant. That's a bit cocky. I think I'm not, no, here's what we're going to do on the raft. We're going to aim right for the rock. That's a bad idea. That seems counterintuitive. I'm not sure that's what we should do. Yeah, do it. Paddle hard, straight for the rock. When you get there, try to touch it. It'll be fun. That's a bit cocky. That's a bit arrogant. I'm not one who can do that kind of thing. And so then we end up in our humility disobeying and actually ending up in the water. Right? And there are times when you're in the turmoil and God says, face it. Just face it. Bear down. Don't look away. Don't distract yourself with other projects. Don't distract yourself with entertainment. Right? Don't numb yourself to it with drink or other things. Don't avoid it. Face it. Paddle hard into it. And when you get there, go for it. And that might be trust me. That might be tell that person about me. That might be make that application. Fill out that job application. It might be have that conversation. It might be take that training. Whatever it is, you go, oh, I couldn't do that. That's just a bit arrogant. That's just a bit cocky. And then you end up in the water because God's saying, no. What actually do you believe? Do you believe me? Do you trust me and my knowledge of the river, my knowledge of the rapid, or do you trust you who's never done this before? Right? And so there's something when we're talking about the God of deep waters, we're talking about the raft guide who knows the torrent. Are we listening? And are we obeying? Because the real humility is obeying and trusting and obeying the instruction of the person who knows better. I had the false humility of, I'm not going to try and touch the top of the rock. That's arrogant. No, what's arrogant is thinking I didn't need to listen to my river guide. And thinking I knew how rafts worked. Now, praise God, had a life jacket, helmet. All I had to do is curl up in a ball. I bobbed around, and I came out of it, and I was like, woo, that was kind of fun. Right? Anyhow. If the Lord had not been on our side, let Israel say, if the Lord had not been on our side, when people attacked us, they would have swallowed us alive. When their anger flared against us, the flood would have engulfed us, the torrent would have swept over us, the raging waters would have swept us away. Praise be to the Lord who has not let us be torn by their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the fowler's snare. The snare has been broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. And this is where we're gonna sort of launch into our series about the God of deep waters. Interesting. In the Psalms of Ascent, there are 3 other times where the maker of God is identified as the maker of heaven and earth. Psalm 121, I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. And then there at the end, Psalm 134, we heard last week, may the Lord bless you from Zion, he who is the maker of heaven and earth. And next week, we're going to talk about God, the God of creation, who hovers over the waters of creation. God is the maker of heaven and earth. Actually, in that depth, in the torrent, in this deep water, God is the maker of heaven and earth. Solid stuff. A place to stand and a place to breathe in that deep water. And so that's what we're launching into now. When we're in the depths, how we ascend together, we ascend in worship, we focus on God and journey from that place of depth, exile, whatever, depression, lowness, to the place of God's promise, the place of God's presence. Because he is the God of deep waters. He is the maker of heaven and earth. He knows the water. We listen to his instruction in humility. We obey in confidence. Right? And we know that he's the one who makes heaven and earth, gives us a place to stand and a place to breathe in the depths, or out of the depths. We'll talk about that more next week. All right, that was a lot. It was a bit scatty there. I apologize. There's not like, that wasn't nice, like coherent, point 1, 2, 3 kind of a thing. But hopefully there's something in there for each of us to think about and to meditate on and to actually just quietly before the Lord. We're about to sing together as we prepare for confession. Right? There might be something in there that God has sort of pricked your heart and your mind about. You're like, ooh, yeah, okay. I think because God's on my side, I'm right. You know, you need to hear, actually, just because God's on your side doesn't mean he's cool with you. If God is cool with you, he is on your side. That doesn't mean poop's not going to hit the fan. Right? It does mean that he'll bring us through it. Right? And you might not be around to see that. And others might be born and arrive in the middle of the poop storm, but maybe they get to see it. Either way, God is faithful. Right? And you need to orient yourself in that reality. It could be, right, that you're sitting back and you're like, in my humility, I'm actually disobeying the river guide. And actually, I need the humility to obey. And that might mean participating in something bold. Something I think is out of my league and out of my depth. But the river guide said, go for it. Trust me. Right? And you need to have the humility to obey. It might be that in the depths, you still have yet to recognize that God is the maker of heaven and earth. He's the one who gives us a place to stand and air to breathe out of the depths that we find ourselves in. Whatever it might happen to be, let's let the Lord speak to us by His Spirit as we stand and sing worship in preparation for confession.